Welcome to everyone. My name is John Warhurst and I'm your moderator for this special event towards the Synod 2024 opening, October and beyond. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'm speaking from Ngunnawal land in Canberra, and our other speakers, our special speakers, Massimo, Faggioli and Jill Gowdie, are speaking from Ghana land in Adelaide. And I acknowledge that we're all meeting on different Aboriginal lands across this country, and perhaps some viewers are from beyond. I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, including any Aboriginal person present today. I'll remind you that this event is being recorded. Thank you to the three sponsors, the Australasian Catholic Coalition for Church Reform, Garrett Publishing and Catholic Education South Australia, and a special welcome to Massimo Faggioli and Jill Gowdie, who will be speaking later. It's our practice to, one further word, and that is that there will be an opportunity for questions to be posed. There's never enough time to get to all of them, but it will be the Q&A function where questions can be posed rather than the chat function, which will not be operative. It's our practice to begin with a short reflection, and I'm going to draw mine from Pope Francis, his book, Let Us Dream, with Austin Ivory, which contains extensive discussion of synodality. Speaking of tradition, the Pope says, "Tradition is not a museum, true religion is not a freezer, and doctrine is not static, but grows and develops. Like a tree that remains the same, yet which gets bigger and bears more fruit. There are some who claim that God spoke once and for all time, almost always exclusively in the way and form that those who make this claim know well. That is why, says Pope Francis, I like to quote Gustav Mahler, that tradition is not the repository of ashes, but the preservation of fire." It's now my great pleasure to introduce Professor Massimo Faggioli. His bio has been distributed, so I won't repeat it all, but he is a most distinguished guest for us today. He is Professor of Theology and Religious Studies in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Villanova University in the United States, and he is currently visiting Adelaide for 2 weeks and giving a variety of presentations. I'll just add a couple of things. One is that Massimo is a contributing editor to Commonweal magazine, and that notably for an Australian audience, he was an international consultant to and co-author of the 2021 official report, The Light from the Southern Cross, Promoting Co-Responsible Governance for the Catholic Church in Australia. Welcome again, Massimo, and over to you.
Thank you very much, John, for this very kind introduction. Thank to all for being here, and thank you for this invitation to speak to you, and also, and especially thanks to Jill Gowdie, who had this idea to invite me in Adelaide for these 2 weeks that are wonderful. Once again, wonderful experience for me. The Australian Church has been really a very important lung for my theological and ecclesial breathing in these last few years. So here my job is to give some perspectives on what has happened, but especially on what's going to happen with the second assembly of the Synod on Synodality in 6-7 weeks in Rome. So here, the first thing that I want to say is that when we ask ourselves the question what to expect of the Synod, there is in the very word the problem of expectations. And this is something that is particularly complicated when we embark in a long process of transition in the church that has started officially in 2021 when Pope Francis opened the synodal process, but it's really at the heart of the pontificate of Pope Francis, because he started talking about synodality shortly after his election, and especially since 2015, when the synods really became a central moment for the steps forward that this pontificate has made in these last 11.5 years. So we approach the second session of the synod coming from an experience that is already established, and that's one of the reasons why whoever the successor of Pope Francis, it's hard to imagine the synodal reform of the church to be forgotten or to be dismissed as a personal project of Pope Francis. This is because the synodal process globally and at the central level in Rome with the two assemblies has been cemented already by local experiences, quite different. And one of them, and as I have said in these last few days here in Adelaide, one of the most important, absolutely, has been the Plenary Council for the Catholic Church in Australia, which has provided the church with a very interesting model. But there has been the German Synod, which has caused much more worries in the Vatican, as we know, and surely the matrix of the synodal church that Pope Francis has in mind in Latin America, in different countries, but overall at the continental level. So we approach the second assembly of the Synod in Rome of October 2024 with two steps that we should keep in mind. First, the first assembly of last year, and the intercession from December to today, basically. And so the first assembly was about creating a certain climate among the members of the synod. Let's remember, for the first time, lay members, women with the right to vote, and a certain way of handling the hot button issues, the delicate topics, in ways that was really particular and more typical of a spiritual retreat than of a parliament, as it has been for many, many centuries in the life of the church when big assemblies have gathered to talk about important issues. So this is something that I think will be replicated in the second assembly. So a certain style of creating an intimacy of conversation and trying to reach a consensus that is not based on who wins a debate. But there's something different this time for the second assembly, and the difference is because, and this has been one of the interesting things that we have seen during the intercession from the end of the first until the beginning of the second assembly, is that the leadership of the synod and the entire church has learned from the missteps or mistakes of the preparation of the first assembly and of the celebration of the first assembly. And this has been corrected, as it happened also at Vatican II in different ways, with the creation of commissions, of study commissions, of experts, really qualified experts, at the beginning of 2024. And so 15 commissions that have been appointed by Francis upon advice of many experts that will work until the synod, but 10 of these 15 commissions will work after the synod, at least until the summer of 2025, to continue working on the topics that the synod will discuss. And so this is important because it tells us that the synod doesn't end with the end of the Second Assembly of October 2024, it will continue at the highest level with commissions of experts that will have to come up with proposals, but will continue even more at the local level, where the synodal process is really in hands of the local churches, of their lay people, of their clergy, of the bishops. So here, I think that we will see at the Second Assembly of the Synod that there are three major issues, I think, that are at the heart of the agenda. One is how to revitalize the role of lay people as baptized persons with rights and duties that are quite clear in doctrine, but need to become more inspired by changing realities on the ground, or on who does pastoral care, who's in the role of leadership in our local churches. The second is the structuring of the local church, which in many cases has already started acting synodally, but in many other cases has ignored that because it ignored already Vatican II in these last 60 years. So how to rethink the functions of those who are in ordained ministry with the instituted ministry, the people of God. And so this is something that is really at the heart of what Pope Francis talked about as the problem of clericalism. And the third key issue is how to reimagine the relationship between the universal level of the church, simply put, the Vatican, the papacy, the Roman Curia, and the local churches, in ways that are more respectful of the fact that now Catholicism is a global church, where diversity is not just something that happens and it's a problem that we need to ignore, to deny, but it's really integral part of the Catholicity of the church. Catholicity is the opposite of uniformity. It's made of diversity in unity. And so these issues are on the table, and the Second Assembly will be about a more advanced moment of discernment that will lead to decisions. Discernment is not just a nice spiritual practice that can make us feel more synodal, but has to lead to some decisions here. So here, what we have heard in these last few months has discouraged some Catholics who have said that there's nothing, or there's not much to hope from the Synod. I disagree, in the sense that the preparation of the Second Assembly and the Instrumentum Laboris, I think they give us some interesting evidence that the process is leading towards an advanced stage in our discussions and in the reform of the church. Here, to be very clear, one of the big questions is the discussion on women deacons, and it is not part of the official agenda of the second assembly of the Synod, but we know already, we have evidence that this is an issue that will be discussed informally at the Synod, will be taken up by one of the commissions appointed by Pope Francis, which is true, will be under the control of the Vatican Dicastery for the Faith. But at the same time, the Instrumentum Laboris, the theological part, is extremely clear that there's no way to avoid, deny, postpone the discussion on the role of women in the church, role not just of participation, but of leadership. There's no doubt. The Instrumentum Laboris is very clear about this. So here there is a split screen. So officially, the discussion of women diaconate is not on the agenda, but we know that the Instrumentum Laboris has been prepared with a remarkable honesty on that question. So here, I think that this is not time for despair, but for investment on this, which is a process that has started. And I think it's irreversible. So there are the three things to keep in balance here. One is that we need to push and work for reform, but there's no synodality possible. So there's no synodal reform that is possible without a cultural conversion, a conversion of the way in which we relate to each other, clergy versus lay people versus clergy in the church. It cannot be just at the sociological level, at the legal level. It has to be a cultural conversion, and that takes time. The second, the synodal process is typically Catholic in this, that there is a lot that is said in these documents that have prepared the Second Assembly, those who have concluded the First Assembly. So there's a lot that is said there. But there's also a lot that is not said, and it's clearly hoped for. We shouldn't be legalistic in looking at the synod. Many things happen in the church suddenly. The pace of change is not steady. And in church history, it's never been. And so we need to look at what is said, what is not said, and we should point out what is not said, why some silences. But we also should be able to read between the lines, because there's a lot that is within those lines that every church leader who has a minimum of awareness of their church know that is really part of the agenda and of the future of the church. So here, I think that what is inspiring of this moment is that this is, as I've said many times, this is the biggest, the most important thing that happens in the Catholic Church since the Second Vatican Council. Since 1965, this is the biggest thing, the most courageous thing. And if one looks at the history of the Second Vatican Council, one looks that it has gone through moments of hope and despair, the famous Black Week of November 1964, things that happened unexpectedly. For example, during the preparation of the Second Vatican Council between 1959 and 62, the Pope John the 23rd, published a document in favor, defending the use of Latin in liturgy, in teaching. And then Vatican II did something different, right? So this is really a big moment, and we should have the long-term view, thinking about, for myself, thinking about my children, my students, the younger generation. So here so we should really be impatient and be patient at the same time. So here, the secret of the synodal process, but of the Catholic Church in general, is the both end. So we need to signal that there's urgency in dealing with some issues, but we also need to know, and we need to tell those who ask us, if we are in a position of responsibility, that real change takes time. Deep change requires a conversion of mentalities, of culture, and you cannot legislate on culture. So there has to be institutional change. The priestly ministry women in ministry, all of that, but that cannot really be accepted without a cultural change. We need to push for a synodal way of teaching of the church. Absolutely. We also need to be honest and acknowledge that our theology, our academic theology, has not been synodal enough. So there has to be a teaching in the way the church teaches, but also a change in the way theological thinking proceeds and is offered and is shared. So here, I just want to conclude with two things, two great ways of explaining what's happening that I take from two of the experts of the synod. One is a Venezuelan lay theologian, Rafael Luciani, who has said many times that the synodal reform is a time of ecclesiological transition, which is something that happens rarely in the Catholic Church. This is really the completion of what started at the Second Vatican Council, but this is really a time of transition to a new way of the Church to think about itself as a global community with so many diversity. And the second is from one of the top experts in this, an Australian theologian and a good friend of mine and of many of us, Ormond Rush, who said that what's happening in the synodal process is similar in the process to what happened in the Catholic Church in the one church in the early centuries, when he said that it was when the church was trying to define what was going to be part of the biblical canon, what books were going to be part of Scripture, of the Bible. Back then, there was no authority in charge of deciding for the whole church. There was no papacy that was comparable to what has become today. And so that was a slow process of building a consensus. And in the end, it worked, because we have a consensus since the early centuries on what is Scripture, what are the books that belong to Scripture. So this is a similar process, because there is this moment of building a new consensus on how to be church. And this is really something that has a lot of promise, with some moments of disappointment, if not despair. But what I've seen in these last few years, in these last few months, especially with the preparation of the Second Assembly, is, I think, full of promise. I'm going to stop here. I thank you for your patience, and I'm looking forward to the comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Massimo. We've had quite a few questions already, but I'm going to lead off with a couple of my own. I was very taken by your idea that we, the present generation or the older generation, must be both patient and impatient. Sometimes that might change from day to day, I think, in terms of what we know of the Synod. Recently, we've heard in Australia from a range of people who, like yourself, who I very much admire. Timothy Ratcliffe was one. Miriam Wylands, our colleague, was another. And I think my question was going to be, well, they appear very comfortable about progress so far. Where do you sit? And I think, am I right in saying that you do sit towards the, well, certainly the positive, if not the very positive side of opinion as far as the Synod is concerned. And it's almost as if the long term, our present generation has to be self-sacrificial, in that we may not see the fruits of our involvement in synodal practices, or it'll take a long time. Am I right that you're thinking that? And I'd just like to mention Catholics for Renewal, which is one of the leading renewal groups in Australia, lay renewal groups, has recently editorialised that perhaps the Synod might fall short of its potential, and that perhaps even that progress has stalled. They use the term, perhaps it's going to be a Clayton Synod. Now, that might seem harsh, but I think it has to be said that there's a range of opinion in the Catholic community. Would you like to respond to some of those thoughts that I put forward there?
Sure, there is a range of opinions, and I respect that because they come from very different backgrounds and so on. So yes, this could be defined as a time of sacrifice. There's a lot to be said about sacrifice that is necessary and it's good. At the same time, I can tell you that the Australian Church, as I have experienced it in Adelaide in these 2 weeks, but also in previous year, 2020, working at the Laos Center, is more synodal, has more experience, and has a more comfortable relationship with the practice of synodality than most other churches. So here there are, I mean, some particular, ways of being impatient in every country. But if we compare, for example, what happened at the early synods of Pope Francis 2014, 2015, and today, this is a church that in a decade has become used to this. There's no significant opposition against that. The problem is more than the opposition, the impatience.
Yes.
And sometimes the better is enemy of the good, I think, right? So here it's a delicate moment, and some members of the church have more rights to be impatient. As a white male, I agree that I have less urgency on some issues, but I have a daughter who's asking questions on the role of women in church. So I see that, I hear that, but I think this is a time for investment, a generous investment that looks at the big picture of the Catholic Church and how much has happened in these last few years, actually, already.
It seems to me that there is a dance going on between Pope Francis and the Synod, if I could put it that way. The Pope's apparent rejection, outright rejection of the women's diaconate was recently spoken outside of the Synod process. Can you comment on how you see that relationship? Many Catholics I know ask me, well, what's Pope Francis up to? Is he playing the long game too? And is it a delicate balance between, say, the Pope and the Synod, and certainly the Pope and the Synodal way in Germany, which you mentioned? Sometimes harsh things seem to be said by the Pope at the same time as he's, encouraging a synodal process.
So the first thing is that I think it was unfortunate that Pope Francis said those things in an interview of that kind. I think it was not entirely respectful of the synodal dynamic. So, but this is typical of Pope Francis. He speaks often off the cuff without a script. I don't think that is the definitive response, also because Pope Francis is the same Pope who has created 2 study commissions, and if the issue is on the agenda of the synodal process, it is thanks to him. I mean, this has happened to him entirely because of him, because before we were not talking about that. So yes, so there's a dance. There are all kinds of dances in this time. So between Pope Francis and the Synod, within the Vatican itself, the Roman Curia and the Synod, it is separated from the Curia, but it's in Rome. Within different churches in Germany itself, there is a development of different, expectations from the German Synod. So yes, so there's a lot of dancing going on, but all these couples are dancing in a direction that is going into a certain way. It's not going back, I think. That's what I was impressed by reading the Instrumentum Laboris, how good the theology of that document is, how important the work of theologians who know that their stuff has been maintained in this document, something that had not happened 1 year ago. So here, the dance between the Vatican and the theologians on synodality right now, who is leading right now in this dance are theologians. And theologians who are good at that job, that have been marginalized for a long time, and now they have been called in. That is something that I don't remember that in the synods of the previous decades, honestly.
You mentioned that you thought that synodality was irreversible post Pope Francis. But having said that, to what extent is Pope Francis's longevity, in your view, important in the short to intermediate term for the momentum of synodality within the church? I mean, the study groups won't report in full until next year. Would you be hoping, and you would think it possible, that Pope Francis might serve? You can't predict the future, but it would be a good thing if Pope Francis was around to shepherd this process for a little while, at least.
Yes, I don't think that the pontificate of Francis is going to end soon. He's traveling. He's embarking on an incredibly challenging trip in a few weeks in Indonesia. So it's a pontificate that is really not in decline. It might, a few things might be slower than at the beginning, but certainly not at a standstill. So here, what's important in this discussion is that, yes, the papacy is important for the synod, but also the other way around. The synod is very important to create a certain kind of consciousness on what the church needs to think about at the next conclave. Okay, because the synod is the most important opportunity that some 50 cardinals have to know each other, to become comfortable in talking among themselves about some issues. So here, there's always been this dialectic between the Pope and the assemblies that he gathered, which was integral part of the Second Vatican Council, and it's a similar thing today with the Synod.
And finally, from me, I must come back to the equality of women in the church, which you mentioned, and you also mentioned your daughter's aspirations, looking to the future. How would you like to expand on your comments on equality of women in the church? Because for me and many others, it's the most important issue facing the church at the moment. And I say that like you as a white male. Where are we going there? Not only in governance, but also in ministry.
So I think that I wrote and I spoke in favor always of the diaconate for women. There's no document of the church that prohibits that or makes that theologically difficult or not. It's a cultural problem, and for some countries like Australia or like the States, it would be culturally very easy for some to accept and very difficult for others to accept. It's not a theological problem. It is a cultural problem of accepting a new phase to ordained ministry. So that needs to happen, I think. I think probably in different ways, in different times, in different phases, in different countries. that needs to be articulated carefully, not exactly with a language of rights, of legal rights, but with the baptismal language, which is less defiant of the tradition and of authorities. This is something that I think will happen. I hope it will happen soon, because it's something that many women, it's a ministry that many women have been doing for a long time, in ways that are not acknowledged, that in many cases the Vatican knows about this, but it's easier not to give recognition, to make the step, but it's no longer a taboo. I mean, many bishops, cardinals have come out and have said, yes, I'm in favor of that, because they know it's a cultural issue, not a theological one, and it is, from the point of view of the law of the church, easy to do that, but it must be done in a church that will embrace this. Well, women will say, yes, I want to do this, because that's the biggest challenge. What if we open that and nothing happens? So in some churches, that is more likely to have a positive impact, and in other churches, right now, they're not in that condition to take that up. So that's really part of acknowledging that it's a church that needs to decide different things at different times. And that's really new for the Catholic Church.
Thank you, Massimo. I won't be too greedy and continue talking. We have 31 questions, so clearly we can't address them all. Let me see if I can... well, the first question is, what was the page number of the quote of mine? And it's page 57. Let me just see what else is happening here. Will the Commission's outcomes be made public? Study groups and other commissions.
That's certainly my hope as an historian, as a theologian, but this is something that I think will happen. As we all know, what hasn't happened so far is the publication of the reports of the two commissions for the study of women diaconate. That's a question that has been asked repeatedly, but I think that a certain culture of transparency will lead the leaders of the synod to make those documents, available. That's what I hope that will happen.
I have a question which relates to church language, which I must admit I sometimes find confusing and doesn't speak to people. And the question is, it's hard to promote synodality, which most people do not relate to. They relate more to walking together, which is not church speak. Would you have a comment on the role of speaking clearly in church language?
I agree. As I said to those who I have met in Adelaide in these last few days, sometimes the best way to be synodal is not to use that word, because it can really become too complicated. So here there are some very good pastoral synodal plans that don't rely too much on the word, on that concept. So this is very important for the theological thinking of those who will make decisions at the top of the church, bishops, cardinals. So they need to use that language. But at the local level, it's not always necessary, because the other ways to translate that, I totally agree about that.
Can those in power for historical and self-interested reasons in the church give up that power, so that whatever the titles and whatever the ministry, men and women are equal, both as members of the church and as leaders of the church? A number of the questions are about women in the church. Another one says, so what hope does both and offer to Catholic women seeking ordination to the diaconate. Would you like to say a bit more about women?
Sure.
The
So
equality of women.
in these last few years, there has been the growth of a solid theological tradition on the diaconate of women. There is an established knowledge and a consensus that this is no longer theologically controversial. So this is something that wasn't there before Pope Francis was elected and became Pope. So this is really at the heart of the need to change something in the ministerial structure of the church, because we have seen that the arguments against, they are not solid. They are based on, in my opinion, mostly on fear of changing something and of giving up, in some cases, giving up a certain position of power. So that is symbolically the most important thing. But this can happen only if we create a synodal, climate of trust that this can happen in a church that wants to stay together, and that so it is a matter of theological soundness of arguments, but also of mutual trust. And that's why the synodal gatherings are spiritual experiences more than debating societies. That's very important. Having having women in a synodal aula, it's a totally new experience. I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that for many Catholic bishops and cardinals, it's a totally new experience to have women in one same room with them, being free to contradict them, to vote against them. It's a totally new experience for some of them. For Australia or for North America, this is more normal, but this is absolutely not normal, even for some European countries. So this is a massive, massive change. So that has to be considered with all due attention, I think.
Massimo, I know you've spoken to clergy in Adelaide, gatherings of clergy, and I imagine you have elsewhere. We have a question here which relates to that. How can we best encourage clergy who do not understand or who tend to oppose synodality?
Well, I would tell them that this is to help you do your job, to help you do what's most important in your job. Is not a power struggle. It's to save you from burnout. It's to save you from loneliness, because one thing that we know is that being in ministry today often exposes you to the risk of loneliness, which is not just social, but also emotional, cultural. So this is a church that wants to be synodal, to be more united and more together. It's not a revenge. So if we present the synodal project to the clergy as now it's payback time, or now it's revenge, this is not going to work. And so this is really an offer that, and it's not something that is made up completely, that's new. It has very ancient roots in the tradition of the church. So there's a Catholic theology of synodality that has been established, that is there. So there is resistance, but we should empathize with those who resist against this, not to give up, okay, but to understand why this opposition, why these fears, and try to, and meet those arguments with a spirit of communion that has to be sometimes blunt, but has to be willing to say synodality asks you to change, but also asks me to change as a layperson. It's a mutual process of recognition that we both need to change. It's not just a price that you have to pay. This is how I would phrase that.
Just to extend that question, Massimo, sometimes older clergy are more simpatico with synodality than some younger clergy. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, many things, but one thing.
Do you find that yourself?
Yes, this is it. I've seen that. This has to do with, I mean, many different factors locally, but generally is that it is easier to sympathize and to get the synodal process if there is a biographical or a cultural memory of the Second Vatican Council as something that has really shaped the Catholic Church in a way in which it is today. So when there has been an interruption in the transmission of the importance of the Second Vatican Council, a certain way to make change in the Church and so on, it is more difficult to understand and to accept synodality because it looks disconnected from the history of the Church, from its theology. That's what I've seen. So that's why synodality has to be, I mean, rooted in ways that don't have to be proclaimed with big words, but with a Vatican II idea of theology that is really connected with the social realities, with the idea that there's a living tradition that is in continuity but changes always. That's the biggest factor, I think.
Thank you. We've spoken about the relationship between the Pope and the Synod. There's a question here: how does papal primacy and infallibility, however limited, impact on synodality? How does synodality help understanding primacy and infallibility?
So infallibility is not a problem anymore because it has almost never been used since 1870. So it's one of those weapons that works only if you don't use it. So that's one thing. It's an open question, papal primacy. Certainly, the papal primacy will change something in the way it operates in the global church. This is one of those theological questions that is going to be sorted out, I mean, thought about in the next few years. No one has the solution on that. So we have seen something change already in Pope Francis in the way he has been Pope. He has called synods, he has interacted with them, which is different from its predecessors. But papal primacy has changed multiple times in history in the way of its operating behavior and so on, and this change will continue, I think.
Do synodality and Ignatian discernment, Ignatian spirituality, necessarily go together? I have a question here: is synodality a fruit of Ignatian spirituality?
Well, they do go together for sure for Pope Francis, and at this time, there is a synodality that's possible even without the Jesuits or Ignatian spirituality. I mean, I don't know if Jesuits will take offense of that, but I mean, this is really typical of this Pope, of this pontificate, his way of understanding, making decisions in the Church. But there is also a Benedictine idea of synodal governance, for example, a monastic idea of synodal governance. So there are many different sources from which we can draw to understand how the Church can be governed in ways that are less monarchical. The Jesuitical one is the one of our time, but it's not the only one.
Thank you. Back to the question of the women's diaconate for women. What would you say to women who've been doing the work of deacons for years and have had enough of the delays? And why do you think none of the reports on this issue have been released?
Well, they have not been released because there's extreme caution in the Vatican on this. So there's certain secrecy that doesn't help, I think. So what I would say is the work that you are doing is already diaconal, and it's already bringing fruit. And if I could change anything, I would support your desire. So it's about planting a seed and giving that seed time to bring fruit. And there are some moments in church history where there is silent work that is done in ways that are not acknowledged. So what happened in the Catholic Church at the Second Vatican Council is because certain seeds were planted in the church in the 1920s, 1930s, and 30 years before. And this is where we are. That's I'm not sure that would be convincing, but there's a lot that women can do today to convince younger women that it's worth being a member of the church, even in this situation, in this condition. I think it shouldn't be either you can be a woman deacon or you should leave this church. I think this is the wrong way to put that question, because this can lead to choices that can be satisfactory immediately, but in the long run, they are not good for the church as a whole and for the individual. I think Catholicism has a lot to say, even with all its deficiencies, as it is. It must change, but it's not a condition. I think it shouldn't be a condition to stay or to leave.
Is it possible, or would you like to see key officials like, and I'm reading from a question, Sister Natalie Beckhardt or Cardinal Hollerich, meet with a wider range of Catholics, including Roman Catholic women priests, others, and have them around the table in an informal way?
I think that has happened to some extent. I mean, I don't know the details, but this process has been remarkably open to all kinds of voices, or maybe almost all of them. But this has been a really open door kind of thing, and this should continue at the local level. I mean, this should start with your own local bishop and so on. That's part of what's happening, I think, and it's more difficult at the top level, of course, but this has been more open than in previous pontificates, previous experiences, I think.
Perhaps the last question, because of time, and I think we have asked a lot of the questions that have been put forward. And there are, of course, also many compliments and for you, Massimo, and also many statements, many reflections which don't end in a question. What about the prospect of Pope Francis appointing a woman as a cardinal? Cardinal does not.
That's more complicated because since 1962, all cardinals must be bishops. And so that is technically complicated. There are many more women now in the Vatican, in the Roman Curia, than ever before. That's not enough. I totally agree. I don't think you need necessarily to be a cardinal to be a woman in power in the Vatican, the Church, as Sister Natalie has shown. So that is is how I see the situation on this right now.
Thanks to you, Massimo, and thanks to the 59 people who have used the Q&A function, and clearly there are some whose questions haven't been asked, although there is also double up in some of the questions. I'll now ask Dr. Jill Gowdie, Director of Catholic Identity and Mission, Catholic Education, South Australia, to offer a response. Jill's bio has been distributed, and I'll just say that she is a recognised leader in Australia and overseas in formation, mission, and Catholic education. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you very much. Pardon me. Thank you very much, John, and thank you so much, Massimo, again. Continuing the conversation. Just very few minutes left. I probably would want to make 3 points. Let me just make 3 points. And I've been able to see all of the questions and comments coming through. And I need to say, as a woman speaking at the end, how moved I am by how many questions there are there about women. And I will say that my entire adult life, I have heard, things take time, Jill, things take time. I've not heard a woman say that to me, but I've certainly heard that a lot within our church. I'm speaking from the perspective of Catholic education. So I know that there are a lot of people listening to this who come from that world and that face of our church. And so from that perspective, probably I would say 3 things. Firstly, Massimo, you started speaking about the importance of managing expectations, which is so critical in terms of the Synod and its outcomes. And I think from the perspective of working in Catholic education, I think we've learned well how to manage expectations, and in particular, whole paradox. We do it every day with the parents, with the children who come to our Catholic schools, and with our staff. So, and when I say that, we hold that paradox of, here comes everyone, as James Joyce said. Everyone is welcome in a Catholic school, and at the same time, we hold deep and close the essence of what it is to be Catholic and what the identity of a Catholic school and the Catholic Church is. So we hold both of those things in our own witness, and we manage a lot of expectations in that space and continue to do so. Secondly, I was really interested in what you said about the role of theologians and how they are taking a leading role in this. And I am very much a both and kind of woman. So my whole team know that, and anyone who hears me knows that I always speak about that. I think for theologians, we look to them to be both prophetic and grounded in the world and in life. And, you know, I think the best Catholic theologians do that. And you do that, Massimo. So I thank you very much for that. And that is why you have such a strong resonance with so many Catholics around the world. I'm conscious that we don't have time to speak about this, but the Vigano Schism drew in theologians who very much reacted to the synodal journey and to Pope Francis and his stance or his curiosity in opening some questions, his provocations, and his capacity and willingness to open a space for dialogue. So, you know, there is a tussle, as we would expect, among theologians as well. And I was really keen to hear more about your thoughts around that and what's happening there and what might happen as we journey further into synodality and beyond October. And I think probably, look, finally, because we are well out of time, I loved the quote that you used, John, to begin, and the whole paradox of ashes and fire, and You know, may we have a holy fire that keeps us burning, or may we have an impatient, patient kind of fire that burns in our hearts. May it be both and. So I want to thank you, Massimo, on behalf of everyone and all of us here and those around the country and around the world who happen to be listening into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Such a wonderful response. And thank you from me, Massimo, once again. If only we could have more of you, but we are able to follow your writings and your books and in other ways. And I'm sure many of us will do that. So pretty much on time. It's now up to me to pass over to David Hugan from Garrett Publishing, who will close the session. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, John. And I hope that the many thousands of people who registered for this event, we're so delighted to be able to bring these sorts of events to you. So thanks for your participation. And Massimo, Jill, and John, thanks for yours as well. If you've been on these sessions before, you know that there's no such thing as a free webinar. So if you like what you heard from Massimo and Jill and John today, one way of supporting them, not surprisingly, is to support them by buying their books. So Massimo has a new book coming on theology and Catholic education, higher education. And in fact, my chats with school leaders all across the country say, what does synodality look like for us as educators and for us in our school communities? So I'll talk about that a little further in a moment. The Liminal Papacy of Pope Francis is also a wonderful book. Many people who were on the webinar that Massimo did for us a number of years ago would know, because they purchased this book, that this is a really interesting dive into Francis and his papacy. John has been wrestling with the church hierarchy for many, many years, and we were proud to produce John's books over the last couple of years that show that explored his journey in working with church hierarchy here in Australia, along with Massimo on the Southern Cross document from 2020, as well as many other activities he's done over the years. The wonderful Jill Gowdie has a book that is designed to stir the soul of Catholic education. So if there are people who are in Catholic education on the webinar today and want to stir the soul of their students in their school communities, then Jill's book here is fantastic. And a number of years ago, we had the opportunity, really, when this concept of synodality came about. This was a word that we weren't familiar with, and we're still struggling with. We had Anne Benjamin and Charles Burford, who had done quite a fair bit of work into this concept before it came to the fore to most of us, to produce a book on leadership in a synodal church. And what this does is try to drive down, if you like, into your Catholic enterprise, whether that's a social enterprise, whether that's a school, or indeed a parish. What does synodality look like? What can it look like in your environment? And a number of questions came through demonstrating on a number of occasions that I think one mentioned that the parish priest refused to acknowledge this webinar was going on today, didn't want to promote it, and the like. So, and I hear that regularly in talking to parishioners all around the country. So we're very pleased to produce Anne and Charles's book. today's session is recorded, and we will send a video out next week. All the books that I just mentioned too will be featured in the email. So again, if you wish to support our authors and our speakers today, that would be great. If you don't wish to buy them from Garrett or pre-order them from Garrett, head down to your local bookstores, because we want to support bookstores. They may not have the books in stock, but they can certainly order them. And supporting local bookshops, I think, is really important, because if we don't, they won't be there, and we won't know what we've missed by them closing their doors and shutting up shop. So that's it. Again, I would like to thank everybody involved in today's webinar. It's been fantastic, Massimo, particularly your, I was edge of the seat discussion, and the questions that John had to glaze over there, they really did show the hurt that many people feel, women and men, but particularly women, the hurt that exists in that whole discussion around the dicatonate and the role of women, or the ordination of women and the like. So thank everybody for their participation. And I will close the webinar in a moment with my very grateful thanks and my blessings to all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.